People and Politics.
Well, hello and welcome to the second episode of People and Politics podcast. My name's Paul O'Kane, member of the Scottish Parliament for the West Scotland region. I created this podcast because I want to hear some of the unique stories about the people and places in the region that I represent, and maybe because there's some listeners out there who'd like to hear them too. So something that makes me really happy when I visit a village or a town in the region is finding out that the town or the village has a really strong local community group or a charity, or has a really interesting history. And organisations that do work in their community and for their community is a priceless thing. And I do my very best to engage with them, learn about their great work, and then highlight that in the Scottish Parliament. And I suppose the Renfrewshire village of Kilbarchan is really lucky because it has a fantastic community organisation and many community organisations, but also has a really, really rich history and a very, very old heritage. So today we're speaking to one of those great community groups and one of those historic groups called the Kilbarchan General Society, and it was established in December of 1765, and the society has worked hard to provide exactly what the village has always needed. And today I'm happy to be joined by the priests of the Kilbarchan General Society, and we'll talk about that title in a wee minute. Norman Kerr, OBE, or Norrie, I think, if Norrie's happy with Norrie, who's going to tell us a bit about the work of the society and about the village that it serves. So thank you so much, Norrie, for agreeing to come on and agreeing to speak to us today. And I suppose we'll maybe start with that title, priests. Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's an old Scottish word, and it's simply a kind of use of president or chairman or that kind of thing. So it was always in place from 1765. So the priests was always the head of the organisation, and that's simply all it means. We get lots of different spellings of it, and president and whatnot, but I think we've got delusions of grandeur when we start to label ourselves president of anything.
Well, yeah, and well, given some of the people in the world that hold that title, we couldn't possibly comment on that today.
Absolutely.
But I suppose that title reflects the heritage and the hundreds of years of history of the General Society. We've mentioned 1765, over 250 years of service. That's quite something. And, I suppose we'll start at the start. How did the General Society come to be?
I think when you look back at that kind of period of time, Kilbarchan was very much part of the Scottish weaving industry. Weaver's Cottage still in the village today, run by
National Trust look after it, don't they? I know.
National Trust for Scotland. There were lots and lots of houses had their own home looms. So it became very much a centre for industry, and the General Society was started by 24, I suppose you would call them local businessmen. We talk about heritors and tradespeople now, but they recognised that within the village there was a need to support people. Weaving isn't or wasn't what you see now. You see the Harris weavers, the folks working away at home. Fairly dangerous game, with the shuttle going back and forward, confined space, lots of wool fibres, cotton fibres flying around to breathe in. So weavers were, people who could take ill, and again at the time, clean water, sanitation, all of these things were an issue. So the General Society came into being to support the village, and the minute books that we've still got, we claim to be the oldest continuous society of our kind in the whole of Scotland, if not the whole of Great Britain. They will say things like to Mrs. Smith, Mrs. McClumphy, 1 tonne of coal. So they were dipping into their own reserves to support people who had fallen on hard times. Hubby couldn't work for whatever reason. The family still needed support, and I suppose that support in many ways was always there, and no doubt and we might want to talk about Habby Simpson and why
Indeed,
the locals are called Habbies. But Habby Simpson was the local butcher, more famed for being a left-handed piper, but he was the local butcher, and him and his wife used to give out parcels of butcher meat to people who had fallen in hard time. So he was being, quite philanthropic in supporting the village, and I suppose some of that rubbed off on the folk of the General Society to say, we've got a thriving community here. What can we do to support it? And over the years, you had the Front Society, or committee rather, that looked after the wells in the village, the drinking water. And we still have letters back and forward between the Front Committee and the local authority, the council, talking about tests to the quality of the water to make sure that the well was still running sweet, the water wasn't foul, all of those kind of things. So there's been that 250, 260 years of supporting village life and the people within the village.
Yeah, and I suppose it's quite radical when you talk about it in the context of the time that it was established. And obviously that was a very radical period in our history in Scotland. And I think when I think about weaving, and we've just had Small Shot Day in Paisley, obviously, yes, and the sort of radical tradition of trade unions and workers being represented and well cared for, but there's some of that in the work of what the General Society was trying to do about, I suppose, the common good and the well-being of people. And we can also think about, for example, Fenwick weavers, not far from here in Ayrshire as well, where the kind of modern cooperative movement started. Yep. And, so Kilbarchan's very much at the heart of that sort of radical tradition as well. I mean, would you kind of recognise some of that in the history?
Absolutely. And I think it's, it's a kind of mark that weaving, as, the big mills come in and people were having to find alternative bits of employment or change tact, that many of the weavers in Kilbarchan went to become silk weavers, which was rarer and couldn't be done the same in the big mills. And my own daughter wanted to do a bit of the genealogy, she's quite taken with it. Who do you think you are? Yeah. And started to trace back the Kerr family history in Kilbarchan. And she managed to trace her family back to 1796 in Kilbarchan. And of course, in the best tradition of who do you think you are, you're always related to royalty or to, some landed gentry.
Yeah.
And I'm both delighted and disappointed to say that there's none of that on the Kerr side. There's a tradition of weavers from 1796 when we believe we came over from Ireland, right up until the very early, 1900s.
Yeah.
Nobody moved out of the village.
Yeah.
They were all there. And actually in Weaver's Cottage, there's a photograph of a 4 times great-grandfather or 3 times great-grandfather on a old weaver's day out. And of course you got the photograph and the names of the weavers, and they all look exactly the same. Wee men in great big kind of woolen coats and flat bonnets and grey beards. Yeah. And no idea what one he is. It could be anyone at 30 or 40. But I think you're right. I mean, it was that. How do we continue to support a village and not only, be radical in what we're doing, but as time moved on and changes came, the big mills coming in, less opportunity for people to be weavers, to support them into moving into silk, but also in terms of the public park, recognising that people just couldn't be slaves to the loom 7 days a week. So the society was instrumental in bringing the public park as a place for recreation for people. And round about the village, as people went for walks, as they did in Sundays, to establish a number of benches on walks round the village so people could sit and take their ease on one of the benches that the General Society had installed around the village on the walks through the countryside there. So, yeah, very, very much so.
Yeah. And do you know, I think that's it's really interesting because we've touched on a number of places in Kilbarchan and a number of characters of Kilbarchan already in this conversation. But for anyone who's listening who maybe doesn't know the village, it's a beautiful village. You know, it's preserved through its conservation status. Those weavers' cottages are still there. Habby Simpson, obviously, within the steeple. Do you maybe want to say a wee bit more, I suppose, about, you know, what does Kilbarchan look like? What are the kind of key points in the village, and maybe a bit more about Habby Simpson and the steeple and the importance of that to the community?
Like everything else, the village has grown over the years, and there's been more housing added into that. But the core of the village built round about the steeple hall, very much, you know, a lot of those buildings dating back to the 1700s to the 1800s. So you get a real historical feel walking around the village. Number of small shops there, and certainly the redevelopment of the Steeple Hall that we're currently looking at with Infrastructure Council. We hope that we can inject a bit more life back into the village. That's not to say that there isn't life in the village, of course there is. And people got on with that very well. But certainly the village, I think, has felt the loss of the Steeple Hall.
Yeah.
Certainly it was fallen into disrepair, and certainly then COVID came along, and a lot of the groups that used the Steeple Hall, you know, there was a Beetle Drive that folks used to come to every week and things like that, and a variety of clubs that met. That all went. And it would be nice to get some of that back into what's been happening.
And the Steeple Hall, you know, as you say, real kind of the centre of the village in many ways, and that really historic building, and really interesting. And we'll maybe talk a bit more about some of the thoughts around how that might develop. But so Habby Simpson, the left-handed piper, is depicted in his statue on the Steeple Hall, and so we were talking about him being a butcher, and but what is his real significance, I suppose, to Kilbarchan, with folk being called Habbies after him and that sort of thing?
I think it was because he had that philanthropic outlook, that he did support the people of the village, and as we say, he was a renowned piper. And because of his work and the work him and his wife, then it was one of those, you know, we want to be like Habby Simpson. So that's why, you know, the name came around. I'm sure some of your listeners will have alternative stories to that, and we'd be delighted to hear them as well. But certainly when they were looking at building the steeple, and it was important to mark Habby Simpson, and there is a statue. A Habby up there. That statue was actually created by a guy who was responsible for doing ships down in Greenock, and he carved figureheads on ships. Right. So the first statue was a wooden statue, and there was a lot of rumour to say it was off there's no resemblance to Habby Simpson. That's just a statue that this guy had lying about in his workshop. But if you look at ships, it was always just a bust, and they were quite big things. This was kind of life-sized. So, it was, again, through somebody who knew somebody that we got this guy to carve a wooden statue. And if you look at the bust that's now left and a painting of Habby Simpson that we have, they're identical. Right. There's no
you can see that.
dispute that this was an old bit of wood that the guy had lying about, off a ship. So they carved that and put that up, and that was there for many years until early 1900s when it started the General Society recognised it needed to be renewed, and they wanted to put a bronze statue up. The cost of that at that point was going to be somewhere in the region of £400. They managed to raise £114, so they were some way short. But there was a sculptor, a chap that worked in brass and bronze, who became a member of the General Society and did it for £100.
Right.
So that was his contribution. And we still see, today, members of the society doing things. The society has a number of office bearers, but it's got what they call 12 managers. And a manager is basically a committee member. So there's a committee that helps the priests run the society and do events. And those folks are still heavily involved in doing things around the village. Mm-hmm. I spoke about, doing some good stuff around the village. One of the weavers was a chap called Robert Allen.
Right.
And he was a famous poet as well. Mm-hmm. And there was a statue come plaque erected to Robert Allen that had become overgrown. So the guys got together and renovated that, gave it a clean up, and it's now looking very good again. Excuse me.
I mean, this is really interesting because exactly what I was coming on to ask you was, I suppose, what's the modern relevance of the activities that are undertaken by the General Society, and you've described there, I suppose, a heritage asset that belongs to the village that's then cared for and improved by the society. But what kind of other things in the modern context are the society doing that, because it's about the common good and the goodwill of the village, I suppose?
Yep. Just a couple of years back, and a name to watch out for. There's a young lady who's doing speed climbing, and hopes to compete in the next Olympics in Korea, Eva Hamilton. And we became aware that as a youngster there wasn't a lot of support for her financially, and we made a grant to her to help her on her way and to help raise more sponsorship. And sometimes that's all it needs, is a bit of sponsorship from an organisation that allows you to go and say, look, so-and-so has believed in me, they've given me a bit of a leg up here, how about it? So we've supported Eva. She went to America to train. She had the opportunity to train with her coach for 3 months, and we're hopeful that we'll do that. Last year, beside the old disused railway line, there's a lane called Potts Lane, well used by dog walkers. But I'm afraid that's kind of fallen into, not in a great state of repair. Mm-hmm. The path was all rocks, overgrown. Runs for about a mile and a half. And again, members of the society managed to beg and borrow, and we got several tons of small crushed stones, some tram to put under it, and we renovated the path. And there's a well in the village that we hope to do this year as well. And keeping up the maintenance of the benches. But there's a lot of local charities, the hospice, St Vincent's Hospice, Beats and Cancer Care. There's a lot of things around that we, Erskine, that we recognise do good work. And a lot of that, people from the village will have made use of those supports. And now, I suppose you could say, we run events simply to raise funds that we can put out to individuals like Eva, who was spotted are doing some really good things, but also to the continuing work of the bigger charities who are supporting the folks in need within the village as well.
I met the former president of Ireland, Mary McAleese, and she used a phrase about, she said she loved the bones and the stones of places that were really important to her. And it sounds to me like the General Society is about the bones and the stones of Kilbarchan, so it's about the stones of our heritage and history, but the bones of the folk that live there, you know, and it's really nice to hear that, you know, talented, exceptional young Habbies are getting the support they need to excel and to put Kilbarchan on the map as well as, you know, Scotland and Great Britain if they're competing at that level. And I'm sure Ava would be an interesting topic for a future podcast because she sounds like someone who's very, very talented. But that's great to hear, I suppose, the depth of what the General Society does to support folk, you know, in the village. And that's very much, you know, been your founding principle, and it's still what you're doing today.
Absolutely. And I think what we try and do is, you know, if we can involve people from the village and further apart to take part in the events like Lilia's Day, then we raise the profile of the village, we raise the profile of the work that we do. And if I kind of jump back to Lilia's Day, it's long been a tradition in Lilia's Day that it's the priestess that leads the parade from Lilia's Day, so down towards Milliken Park and up through the village.
So for anyone, Norrie, who doesn't know about Lilia's Day, who's not been, I mean, where have you been if you've not been to Lilia's Day? It's always a good day out, even when it rains, as it did this year. But tell us a wee bit about what Lilia's Day is and why it's so important.
So Lilia's Day is the kind of annual fair, and it's been celebrated for many, many years. It kind of fell away and it resurrected way back in the 30s. So in the 30s, it kind of tells the history of the village. So we've got a procession that starts at the bottom of the village, works its way up through the village and into the public park. And of course, public park, you've got tombola, dog show, tug-of-war, five-a-sides, all of those kind of things that you would expect to see at a village fete.
Yeah.
But going along with that is this parade that tells the history of the village. So you've got St Barchan and his monks, you've got Baron Cunningham, the knight, and of course Miss Lilias. Yes. And Miss Lilias was named after Cunningham's daughter, Lilias. And Miss Lilias, I suppose many places it would be the May Day Queen or the Queen of the Fair or whatever, but Miss Lilias is normally from the primary school, usually primary 7-ish, and she's elected to be the Miss Lilias, and it's her day, if you like. So there's a float of vehicles leave from the bottom of the village. The locals are encouraged to decorate their houses, so if you drive up, it's all full of bunting and festooned with flags, and people put out, you know, massive flower displays and stuff like that. So it sets off at the bottom of the village, goes up the main street, stops at the steeple, and it stops at the steeple to collect Habby Simpson. And it collects Habby Simpson because what they did up until recently was they draped a flag over the front of Habby Simpson, and they get somebody from the pipe band to dress up in period clothes, and Habby would come out of the steeple with his pipes, and he would then lead the parade from the steeple hall up the last half mile into the public park. During the day, the person who's Habby will make various appearances at pubs and through the park, and then at the end of the night, he will walk back for the public park to the steeple hall, back into the steeple. The cloth is raised up over the statue, and that's him, if you like, frozen back in his time. So he comes alive one day a year on Lilia's Day. And I always remember as a youngster, 7, 8 years old, my aunt was the hall keeper in the steeple hall. So we were blessed. We used to get into the hall on Lilia's Day and be there for the procession coming up, and then Habby Simpson appearing from the ladies' room up the stairs, down and to be collected by the parade, and away we went. And as a youngster, obviously fascinated by the story of this is the man that comes alive one day a year to do that. I still have a cousin that stays in the hall, he stays in the village, and his job to earn his pocket money was to wind up the clock in the steeple.
Really?
Now it's electronic, of
Yeah,
course, but it was a wee windy staircase, and he had to climb up and wind the clock, and that was how he got his pocket money.
Yeah.
A wee bit older than me, so I never get the chance to wind the clock. I'm not sure I would have been able to do it
this
anyway.
Is it. I know.
But so that's the whole process of Lily's Day, and it's just a way of, saying to the village, celebrate the life of the village, look at all the organisations that are around the Scouts, the General Society, and over the years, as I say, the priestess leads the procession in a car, but behind that, the General Society actually bought a fire engine for the village way back, late 1700s, and that was brought up from London, horse-drawn thing with the old handles where you pumped it up, very, very small panniers at the side that they poured the water into, so that they could pump this thing and get the hose directed at the fire. That fallen into disrepair over the years. I mean, it's ancient, and one of the things that we did over the last 18 months was renovate that. Wow. And the renovation of it was quite a task, and a couple of the guys, again, managers within the society, exceptionally handy. One was a retired painter and decorator, and the other one's a real, kind of engineering type. So they, stripped us back, renovated it, did up all the old brass fittings for the hoses, etc. The wheels caused us a problem, and the priestess at the time, Michael Kerr Jr., no relation, different branch of the Kerrs, Michael managed to track down through the Worshipful Company of Wheelwrights. Wow. I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Don't these things exist.
That are based in London.
Yeah,
the
London.
Only surviving wheelwright in Scotland.
Wow. It's
a dying trade, and he's on the Isle of Seal.
My goodness.
So we got in touch with him, sent photos of the wheels, and we took the 4 wheels up to him, and he built new wheels from scratch. So ordered the wood, let the wood season, built the wheels, and then we went up to Oban to collect wheels. So the fire engine will never clatter along the streets again. But thanks to Malcolm's at Linwood, we have it stored in their museum.
Yes.
And it comes out once a year now on the back of a wee 1920s truck, and is paraded through the village as well. So again, it's about recognising that heritage.
And that story, I think, epitomises the dedication that the General Society have to preserving that heritage and allowing folk in the village and beyond to see that heritage in front of them. And I mean, is that your motivation, Norrie, for being involved? Because, how did you get involved in the General Society? Obviously, you've got your Kilbarchan connections, but what was your kind of motivation?
I suppose, I'd always known it was there. My dad, going back to the family genealogy, my dad was the first one of the family to escape Kilbarchan.
Right.
He went into the Navy, and I don't know whether he was seen as the black sheep or not, but anyway, he moved far, far away to Elderslie.
Oh my goodness.
The other side of the planet.
That's it.
But he still retained the doctor in Kilbarchan, so he still went up to the doctor
Or his
if
connection.
anything was ever wrong with him. So I went to Johnston High from Elderslie. That was the school. And as you do when you get married, you kind of move wherever you can get housing. And a good school friend moved into Kilbarchan. So he got me involved in the General Society. He said, look, this is a thing we do in the village. You're up in the village a lot, seeing relatives, seeing me. We do things. We run a burn supper. We run a fish supper, cabaret. We do things, so you and your wife should come up and get involved in this. And they were great nights. And the fact that, you know, there was a group of people, 100 people, enjoying themselves, but not only enjoying themselves, but raising money that was going to be used in the village. So what's not to like? So I was a regular attender at events, and then eventually somebody said to me at one of the AGMs, we're looking for a new committee member. You should put yourself forward as a manager. No, that's not for me. I don't stay in the village. I said, well, so-and-so stays in Brookfield, so-and-so stays in Johnson. Yes, the majority of people still stay in the village, but we've all got a connection.
That connection,
So they put me forward as a manager. I was a manager for a number of years and then elected pre-seas 2016.
Yep.
I must have done something right. Because they've asked me to have another shot at it this year.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Aye, so that's connection with the village.
Yeah. And we've got a couple of minutes left on this episode, and really what I want to hear from you, I suppose, is what's next and what's your ambition for the village. You spoke about Steeple Hall, you know, and what would you recommend to people to come and see in Kilbarchan?
I think the Steeple Hall has been, you know, a kind of labour of love for people. It wasn't best used as it was kind of falling into disrepair. The General Society actually own a room within the Steeple Hall, the ladies' room. Yeah. So we've been invited, along with a number of other groups, to have discussions with Renfrewshire Council about what should the hall look like. You know, what can we use this for? How can we breathe a bit of life back into the village in a way that doesn't detract from things that are happening in the village? So, for example, there's a lovely tea room, you know, Bobbins.
Yep.
There's a couple of pubs. So, you know, let's not take business away from them, but could we have some form of heritage centre? We've got Weaver's Cottage, but that talks about the history of weaving. What about the rest of the village? Could we have an art space? Because there's a lot of local talent.
Yes.
One of my uncles collected lots of local paintings by people who, you know, were artists in the village. They were never going to be Hockneys, but, you know, he was very proud of his paintings. Yeah. And actually my young sister, as a wedding gift, that was a wedding gift, that was a painting of the village that she got. She still has to this very day. So I think for the future it's, can we breathe a bit more life into the Steeple Hall? Can we get groups to use it again? And for the society, what else? As I say, there's a well at the bottom of the Bray that we want to renovate this year. But we're always looking for wee projects. What are the projects that we can do with the skills that we've got within? But we always need new members. Years ago, you know, you had to be of sound body and mind. You had to, you know, be free of debt. You had a case of not have received relief from the society, you know, the previous 3 years, all of those kind of things. Now it's much more simple, although we say, we hope you're of good standing, but 20 quid gets you a lifetime membership, and we hope you'll come along to support us at Lily's Day, the events that we have, and basically, you know, this is Live Aid 40 years. For us, keep giving us your money.
Keep giving the money, absolutely. Well, Norrie, I think that's a great place to finish today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I think that final call to action is so that the General Society can continue for the next 100 years and beyond to support the people of Kilbarchan. You know, if you do have ideas, get involved, get in touch. If you have ideas about how to help fundraise, if you want to get involved in the committee, then I'm sure Norrie and the managers would be delighted to hear from you. But it's been a real honour for me to host you today and to have this conversation. As always, on People and Politics, if you've got something interesting that's going on in your community, whether that's Kilbarchan or beyond, don't hesitate to get in touch and we can have you on. But Norrie, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to continuing to engage with the good folk of Kilbarchan and a sunny Lily's Day, we hope, in 2026. Thank you.
Paul, thanks very much indeed.